Hello friends, you are welcome to our literary channel Academic Domain. Today we will discuss the life and works of Albert Camus. The topics such as early years and education, formative years, World War II, resistance and combat, post-World War II, literary career, political stance, philosophy of Albert Camus such as existentialism, absurdism, and revolt. Works by Albert Camus including novels, essays, short stories, plays shall be covered in today's video. If you haven't subscribed the channel yet, please subscribe it and hit the bell icon to get notifications of upcoming videos. Kindly like, share and give your valuable suggestions through comments. Let's begin with the life of Albert Camus. Albert Camus was born on the 7th of November 1913. He was a French philosopher, author, dramatist, journalist, world federalist, and political activist. He was the recipient of the 1957 Nobel Prize in Literature at the age of 44, the second youngest recipient in history. His works include The Stranger, The Plague, The Myth of Sisyphus, The Fall and the Rebel. Camus was born in French Algeria to pied-noir parents. He spent his childhood in a poor neighborhood and later studied philosophy at the University of Algiers. He was in Paris when the Germans invaded France during World War II in 1940. Camus tried to flee but finally joined the French resistance, where he served as editor-in-chief at Combat, an outlawed newspaper. After the war, he was a celebrity figure and gave many lectures around the world. He married twice but had many extramarital affairs. Camus was politically active. He was part of the left that opposed Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union because of their totalitarianism. Camus was a moralist and leaned towards anarcho-syndicalism. He was part of many organizations seeking European integration. During the Algerian War, 1954-1962, he kept a neutral stance, advocating a multicultural and pluralistic Algeria, a position that was rejected by most parties. Philosophically, Camus' views contributed to the rise of the philosophy known as absurdism. Some consider Camus' work to show him to be an existentialist, even though he himself firmly rejected the term throughout his lifetime. Early years and education. Albert Camus was born in a working-class neighborhood in Mondovi, present-day Drain, in French Algeria. His mother, Catherine Hélène Camus, was French with Balearic Spanish ancestry. She was deaf and illiterate. He never knew his father, Lucien Camus, a poor French agricultural worker killed in action while serving with a Zouave regiment in October 1914, during World War I. Camus, his mother, and other relatives lived without many basic material possessions during his childhood in the Belcourt section of Algiers. Camus was a second-generation French inhabitant of Algeria, which was a French territory from 1830 until 1962. His paternal grandfather, along with many others of his generation, had moved to Algeria for a better life during the first decades of the 19th century. Hence, he was called a pied-noir, a slang term for people of French and other European descent born in Algeria. His identity and poor background had a substantial effect on his later life. Nevertheless, Camus was a French citizen and enjoyed more rights than Arab and Berber Algerians under Indigenat. During his childhood, he developed a love for football and swimming. In 1930, at the age of 17, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Because it is a transmitted disease, he moved out of his home and stayed with his uncle Gustave Court, a butcher, who influenced the young Camus. It was at that time he turned to philosophy, with the mentoring of his philosophy teacher Jean Grenier. He was impressed by ancient Greek philosophers and Friedrich Nietzsche. During that time, he was only able to study part-time. To earn money, he took odd jobs, including as a private tutor, car parts clerk, and assistant at the Meteorological Institute. In 1933, Camus enrolled at the University of Algiers and completed his B.A. in 1936 after presenting his thesis on Plotinus. Camus developed an interest in early Christian philosophers, but Nietzsche and Arthur Schopenhauer had paved the way towards pessimism and atheism. Camus also studied novelist philosophers such as Stendhal, Herman Melville, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Franz Kafka. In 1933, he also met Simone Weil, then a partner of Camus' friend, who later became his first wife. Formative years. Camus joined the French Communist Party, PCF, in early 1935. He saw it as a way to fight inequalities between Europeans and natives in Algeria, even though he was not a Marxist. He explained, "We might see communism as a springboard and asceticism that prepares the ground for more spiritual activities." Camus left the PCF a year later. In 1936, the independence-minded Algerian Communist Party, PCA, was founded, and Camus joined it after his mentor Grenier advised him to do so. Camus' main role within the PCA was to organize the Theatre du Travail, workers' theatre. Camus was also close to the Algerian People's Party, PPA, which was a moderate anti-colonialist, nationalist party. In 1938, Camus began working for the leftist newspaper Alger Républicain, founded by Pascal Piat, as he had strong anti-fascist feelings, and the rise of fascist regimes in Europe was worrying him. By then, Camus had developed strong feelings against authoritarian colonialism as he witnessed the harsh treatment of the Arabs and Berbers by French authorities. Alger Républicain was banned in 1940 and Camus flew to Paris to take a new job at Paris Soir as layout editor. In Paris, he almost completed his first cycle of works dealing with the absurd and the meaningless. These works are the novel, The Outsider, UK, or The Stranger, US, the philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, and the play Caligula. Each cycle consisted of a novel, an essay, and a theatrical play. World War II, Resistance and Combat. Soon after Camus moved to Paris, the outbreak of World War II began to affect France. Camus volunteered to join the army but was not accepted because he once had tuberculosis. As the Germans were marching towards Paris, Camus fled. He was laid off from Paris Soir and ended up in Lyon, where he married pianist and mathematician Francine Fauré on the 3rd of December 1940. Camus and Fauré moved back to Algeria, Oran, where he taught in primary schools. Because of his tuberculosis, he moved to the French Alps on medical advice. There he began writing his second cycle of works, this time dealing with revolt, a novel, The Plague, and a play, The Misunderstanding. By 1943 he was known because of his earlier work. He returned to Paris, where he met and became friends with Jean-Paul Sartre. He also became part of a circle of intellectuals, which included Simone de Beauvoir and André Breton. Among them was the actress Maria Caceres, who later had an affair with Camus. Camus took an active role in the underground resistance movement against the Germans during the French occupation. Upon his arrival in Paris, he started working as a journalist and editor of the banned newspaper Combat. Camus used a pseudonym for his combat articles and used false ID cards to avoid being captured. Post-World War II. After the war, Camus lived in Paris with Fauré, who gave birth to twins, Catherine and Jean, in 1945. Camus was now a celebrated writer known for his role in the resistance. He gave lectures at various universities in the United States and Latin America during 2 separate trips. During this period he completed the second cycle of his work, with the essay, The Rebel. Camus was a strong supporter of European integration in various marginal organizations working towards that end. In 1944, he founded the French Committee for the European Federation, CFFE, declaring that Europe can only evolve along the path of economic progress, democracy, and peace if the nation-states become a federation. In 1947-48, he founded the Groupes de Liaison Internationale, GLI, a trade union movement in the context of revolutionary syndicalism. His main aim was to express the positive side of surrealism and existentialism, rejecting the negativity and the nihilism of André Breton. Camus also raised his voice against the Soviet invasion of Hungary and the totalitarian tendencies of Franco's regime in Spain. In 1957, Camus received the news that he was to be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. At age 44, he was the second youngest recipient of the prize, after Rudyard Kipling, who was 41. After this he began working on his autobiography, The First Man, in an attempt to examine moral learning. Camus died on the 4th of January 1960 at the age of 46, in a car accident near Sens, in Le Grand Fossard in the small town of Villeblevin. 144 pages of a handwritten manuscript entitled The First Man were found in the wreckage. Camus had predicted that this unfinished novel based on his childhood in Algeria would be his finest work. Camus was buried in the Le Marin Cemetery, Vaucluse, France, where he had lived. Jean-Paul Sartre read a eulogy, paying tribute to Camus' heroic, stubborn humanism. William Faulkner wrote his obituary, saying, "When the door shut for him he had already written on this side of it that which every artist who also carries through life with him that one same foreknowledge and hatred of death is hoping to do, I was here." Literary career. Camus' first publication was a play called Revolt in the Asturias, written with three friends in May 1936. The subject was the 1934 revolt by Spanish miners that was brutally suppressed by the Spanish government, resulting in 1,500 to 2,000 deaths. In May 1937 he wrote his first book, Betwixt and Between, also translated as The Wrong Side and the Right Side. Camus separated his work into three cycles. Each cycle consisted of a novel, an essay, and a play. The first was the cycle of the absurd consisting of The Stranger, Le Mythe de Sisyphe, and Caligula. The second was the cycle of the revolt which included The Plague, The Rebel, and The Just Assassins. The third, the cycle of the love, consisted of Nemesis. Each cycle was an examination of a theme with the use of a pagan myth and including biblical motifs. Two of Camus' works were published posthumously. The first, entitled A Happy Death, 1971, is a novel that was written between 1936 and 1938. It features a character named Patrice Massault, comparable to The Stranger's Mersault. There is scholarly debate about the relationship between the two books. The second was an unfinished novel, The First Man, published in 1994, which Camus was writing before he died. It was an autobiographical work about his childhood in Algeria, and its publication in 1994 sparked a widespread reconsideration of Camus' allegedly unrepentant colonialism. Political stance. Camus was a moralist. He claimed morality should guide politics. While he did not deny that morals change over time, he rejected the classical Marxist view that historical material relations define morality. Camus was also strongly critical of Marxism-Leninism, especially in the case of the Soviet Union, which he considered totalitarian. Camus rebuked those sympathetic to the Soviet model and the decision to call total servitude freedom. A proponent of libertarian socialism, he stated that the Soviet Union was not socialist and the United States was not liberal. His critique of the Soviet Union caused him to clash with others on the political left, most notably with his on-again, off-again friend Jean-Paul Sartre. Camus had anarchist sympathies, which intensified in the 1950s, when he came to believe that the Soviet model was morally bankrupt. Camus was firmly against any kind of exploitation, authority, property, the state, and centralization. However, he opposed revolution, separating the rebel from the revolutionary and believing that the belief in absolute truth, most often assuming the guise of history or reason, inspires the revolutionary and leads to tragic results. He believed that rebellion is spurred by our outrage over the world's lack of transcendent significance, while political rebellion is our response to attacks against the dignity and autonomy of the individual. Camus opposed political violence, tolerating it only in rare and very narrowly defined instances, as well as revolutionary terror which he accused of sacrificing innocent lives on the altar of history. Philosophy of Albert Camus. Number 1 is existentialism. Even though Camus is mostly connected to absurdism, he is routinely categorized as an existentialist, a term he rejected on several occasions. Camus himself said his philosophical origins lay in ancient Greek philosophy, Nietzsche, and 17th-century moralists, whereas existentialism arose from 19th and early 20th century philosophy such as Søren Kierkegaard, Karl Jaspers, and Martin Heidegger. He also said his work, The Myth of Sisyphus, was a criticism of various aspects of existentialism. Camus rejected existentialism as a philosophy, but his critique was mostly focused on Sartrean existentialism and, though to a lesser extent, on religious existentialism. The absurdity of life and that it inevitably ends in death is highlighted in his acts. His belief was that the absurd, life being void of meaning, or man's inability to know that meaning if it were to exist, was something that man should embrace. His opposition to Christianity and his commitment to individual moral freedom and responsibility are only a few of the similarities with other existential writers. Camus addressed one of the fundamental questions of existentialism, the problem of suicide. He wrote, "There is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide." Camus viewed the question of suicide as arising naturally as a solution to the absurdity of life. Number 2 is absurdism. Many existentialist writers have addressed the absurd, each with their own interpretation of what it is and what makes it important. Kierkegaard suggests that the absurdity of religious truths prevents people from reaching God rationally. Sartre recognizes the absurdity of individual experience. Camus' thoughts on the absurd begin with his first cycle of books and the literary essay The Myth of Sisyphus, his major work on the subject. In 1942, he published the story of a man living an absurd life in The Stranger. He also wrote a play about the Roman Emperor Caligula, pursuing an absurd logic, which was not performed until 1945. His early thoughts appeared in his first collection of essays, Betwixt and Between, in 1937. Absurd themes were expressed with more sophistication in his second collection of essays, Gnosis, Nuptials, in 1938. In these essays, Camus reflects on the experience of the absurd. Aspects of the notion of the absurd can also be found in The Plague. Revolt. Camus articulated the case for revolting against any kind of oppression, injustice, or whatever disrespects the human condition. He is cautious enough, however, to set the limits on the rebellion. The rebel explains in detail his thoughts on the issue. There, he builds upon the absurd, described in The Myth of Sisyphus, but goes further. In the introduction, where he examines the metaphysics of rebellion, he concludes with the phrase, "I revolt, therefore we exist," implying the recognition of a common human condition. Camus also delineates the difference between revolution and rebellion and notices that history has shown that the rebels' revolution might easily end up as an oppressive regime. He therefore places importance on the morals accompanying the revolution. Works by Albert Camus. The works of Albert Camus include novel, short stories, non-fiction, plays, and essays. Novels by Albert Camus. A Happy Death, written in 1936-38, published in 1971. The Stranger, often translated as The Outsider, published in 1942. The Plague, published in 1947. The Fall, published in 1956. The First Man, published in 1994. Short stories by Albert Camus. Exile and the Kingdom. It is a collection of short stories published in 1957. It contains the short stories, The Adulterous Woman, The Renegade or a Confused Spirit, The Silent Men, The Guest, Jonas, or The Artist at Work, and The Growing Stone. Non-fiction by Albert Camus. Betwixt and Between, also translated as The Wrong Side and the Right Side. It is a collection of essays, published in 1937. Nuptials, published in 1938. The Myth of Sisyphus, published in 1942. The Rebel, published in 1951. Algerian Chronicles, published in 2013. Resistance, Rebellion, and Death collection, 1961. Notebooks 1935-1942. Notebooks 1942-1951. Lyrical and Critical Essays, a collection of essays published in 1968. American Journals, published in 1978. Notebooks 1951 1959, 2008. Published in 1989. Correspondence, 1944-1959, The Correspondence of Albert Camus and Maria Cassez, with a preface by his daughter, Catherine, published in 2017. Plays by Albert Camus. Caligula, written in 1938, performed in 1945. The Misunderstanding, published in 1944. The State of Siege, published in 1948. The Just Assassins, published in 1949. Requiem for a Nun, published in 1956. The Possessed, published in 1959. Essays by Albert Camus. The Crisis of Man, lecture at Columbia University on 28 March 1946. Neither Victims Nor Executioners, series of essays in combat, published in 1946. Why Spain, published in 1948. Summer, published in 1954. Reflections on the Guillotine, it is an extended essay, published in 1957. Create Dangerously, essay on realism and artistic creation, lecture at the University of Uppsala in Sweden, published in 1957. Thanks for watching the video.